Welcome to Landmark Theater's Q&A podcast. In this podcast, you will hear discussion with writer, director, and actor Natalie Portman from the film A Tale of Love and Darkness, moderated by arts and entertainment host for KPCC and The Frame, John Horn. Recorded at the Landmark in West Los Angeles.
I want to ask you a little bit about the process. You have your writing, your directing, your producing, your starring. Was that a sequential series of events that led each job to beget the other? And which one was first?
Well, first of all, producing, I was not a producer officially on the film in any way. Of course, directors inevitably sort of affect production by their choices, but I started out wanting to just direct it, and then I started talking to writers after I had gotten the rights from Amos Oz to make the film. I started talking to screenwriters, and they kept saying to me, "You know what you want? Why don't you write it?" Which inspired me to go do that. And then I wanted to hire an Israeli actress to play the role of Fania. And also at the time I was maybe like 27 or so when I started the process. And so was also kind of not the right casting to be the mother of a 12-year-old by the end of the film. And then time went by and I couldn't get money and I kept trying. And finally I kind of aged into being able to play it, and it also helped me get money. So
the fact that nobody wanted to finance the film actually worked to your advantage in that
yes,
you had to act in it to get the financing for the film.
Yes.
When you were meeting with these writers early on and they said you already have a take on it, what was your take? And was it always going to be this narrow part of the story? Because the book is 580 some odd pages.
Yeah, it's a vast book, and it covers many different periods of his life, including the present. You know, that he has himself as, a 70-something-year-old man walking in Arad today, which was 10 years ago now. But so I wanted to focus really on this relationship between the mother and the son, because that was really what moved me most. And of course, there's a natural time when that ends, when, of course, she passes.
So you read this book when you were, 25, 26? Mm-hmm. You make it almost 8 years later. In that period of time, you get married and you become a mom. How do those life events change the way in which you see the material and affect the story that you want to tell?
Well, there's like a logistical answer to that and a psychological answer. Because
I'm only interested in the latter.
Okay. Well, because logistically...
I'm not interested in that.
Okay, you're not interested in it. But it had a big impact, and I think actually pushed me to make it when I made it, because, you have like time slots when you're working with other people's schedules, namely husband and child. And there's very few moments in life that a woman with a husband and a child can fit in, 6 months to go live in Israel and do pre-production and production on a film. And luckily I have a really amazing, supportive partner who was really on board for coming with me and being primary parent during the time that I was working like that, and has a career that is flexible to go. But he was about to start his job in Paris, so I was like, this is my last chance to do this before he started his job, and that really kind of put a fire under me to make it. And personally, of course, it affects. I think it really affects how you see, like the character in the film. When things happen in life that you dream about for a long time, and I don't personally feel the same way as Oz that it's naturally disappointing, but it's definitely naturally different. It's so different from anything you expect, and I think that I really understood that by experiencing those things.
As a director, you have to make thousands of decisions, but you make two very early on. One is to make the film in Hebrew. The other one is to shoot in Israel. Were those related, and why were they important to you?
Yes. The film in Hebrew, I guess, was more of more of the decision because a lot of people encouraged me to make it in English, of course, makes it more palatable commercially. And it just felt to me that I would lose a lot of authenticity if it wasn't in the language spoken in the place. And it's also really a character in the story because, it's kind of a miracle of what happened, and I'm not sure it's ever happened any other time in history where a language that hasn't been spoken in hundreds of years is revived and becomes the daily speech for everyone, and that they had to figure out how to use only a biblical vocabulary to express modern concepts is wild, and also has such an impact on a coming of age of a writer, of course, that he's not only creating stories, he can literally create a language.
What did it feel like? I assume you wrote in English, then translated into Hebrew, but to have this almost love affair with a language, how did that change the way in which you saw the story? Did the language itself become part of the narrative?
Yes, the language is really, really magical because there's both the biblical etymology, like that I included in the film a little bit. That's from the book that, like, human in Hebrew is Adam, like Adam in the Bible, and then earth is Adamah, and then red is Adom, and blood is Dam, and silence is Dumia. That the concept in biblical times, someone in biblical times connected the idea of red and silence is like heart-stopping to me. It's so beautiful. And then there's the modern etymology of them being like, how do we say rhinoceros? That's not in the Bible, And someone's like, well, let's put the word for horn together with the word for nose and call it a horn nose. That's what it is in Hebrew. I mean, the translation of it.
You probably know, as both an actor and as a director, that a huge part of your work is casting your film. You obviously have cast yourself. Can you talk a little bit about how you found your boy and
how I found myself?
How you found yourself and how you found your son?
So yeah, it was a really wild thing to find the boy, because Amos Oz is clearly such a great mind, and to have an 8-year-old be able to portray that brilliance both mentally and emotionally I didn't think it was going to be possible. And I think I met like every kid between 6 and 16 in Israel. And then this boy walked in who was just a miracle. He was so small, and he started doing political impressions in his interview, and not of
Netanyahu, but
yeah, it wasn't like Netanyahu. It was like obscure, like members of parliament, and I was like, oh, so you're really interested in politics? And he's like, well, not really between parties, really more within the party. And I was like, okay, this child is really unique, and he was. I mean, I almost always used his first take.
As somebody who's been directed by a lot of great directors, were there certain filmmakers with whom you worked who you found to be instructive in terms of what to do on any given day and how to talk to your actors?
Absolutely. And also it was surprising to me how some of the people who had the biggest impact I didn't even work with a very long time. Like Anthony Minghella was really, really, I thought about him almost every day while working, and I only did like 10 days on Cold Mountain. And it was when I was 20 or something. It's a long time ago. And he was just so kind and connected to every person in the room. Like, the person who brought snacks around, he'd know their kids' names and ask about them, and in a very genuine way, not in like a politician way, like genuinely like cared about everyone and knew about everyone, and you didn't see a lapse in that behavior. And in every scene just felt like he was another character in the scene. You could just feel him, his energy in the room during the scene, and you felt like you were communicating with him. And that was incredible. And also, he had certain techniques, like I had a scene with Jude Law where my baby is sick. And so when it was on my side, and Jude was off camera, he would tell Jude to surprise me with lines like, it looks like your baby's dying, that were clearly never going to be in the movie, but provoked a reaction in me that was, so I sometimes, I tried to steal that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I worked with Terrence Malick right before I directed, which was great because he's so free and like embraces accident and like chance, and it was a really good kind of attitude to get to have before.
Actors who have directed themselves typically say that one of the biggest parts of the learning curve is they undershoot themselves because they don't want to make everybody feel like they're hogging the camera. And then they get to editorial and they realize they don't have good enough stuff. I'm wondering if anybody told you that you need to really shoot yourself a lot and not worry about it, or were there other pieces of advice you got about how to direct yourself and how to know when you were doing good work?
That's interesting. I didn't get that. I'm like, maybe I'm more egotistical than most actor directors. I shot myself plenty. But Ram Bergman, who I think might be here, one of our producers, wonderful producers, was really wonderful with me. And he like called me the first week of shooting and was like, "You're being too aware of time." He's like, "Don't worry about it. We're in charge. You take as much time as you need," because I was like trying to stay on schedule so much. And I was like, "You just, and that was really calming to hear from my producer, and helpful. But in terms of directing myself, it was good for me because I tend to not be able to watch myself, and because I had to, obviously, and had to approach it in a constructive way where I could look at it and say, okay, that's good enough to move on, or I can do that better, let's try again in this way. I had to kind of be kinder to myself and gentler with myself.
What surprised you about things that you weren't expecting would be difficult or challenging? I mean, you've been on movie sets since you were a kid. Was there something you didn't anticipate, or something that you anticipated being difficult that actually wasn't?
Well, there were certain things that were just like amateur moves that I made. Like during pre-production, there was this crazy storm, which just never happens. And Israel's a desert, so there's crazy wild rain. It even snowed, which really doesn't happen. And in the end of the movie, as in the end of the book, the true thing is that when she died that winter, there was this crazy rains and the river overflowed. And I was like, we're going out and we're shooting it, Malick inspired. And our DP wasn't even there yet. It was during pre-production. And the camera crew very kindly was like, okay, let's go. And we put on crazy rain gear. There was no one outside. Like, no one was as ridiculous as I was. And we went and we shot it and we were drenched and we got back and I looked at it and you couldn't see the rain because rain has to be lit. And of course my DP would have told me that if he was there, but he wasn't there. And so you could sort of see it like hitting the water because it was on the river. And we did get one amazing shot we salvaged, which is the river overflowing, which I don't know how we probably could have found like stock footage of another river overflowing. But this is the actual river in Tel Aviv, really overflowing. So something came out of it.
The book gives you incredibly rich, almost impossibly precise dialogue, but it also creates some stirring images. I want to read a little bit from the book that's a central scene in the movie, and it's when the young Amos goes to visit some cousins. Cousins, is that right? Yes.
Stashik
And here's what Amos writes. I do remember to this day, like two sharp burning coals, her eyes beneath the mourning border of her black eyebrows that joined in the middle. Loathing, despair, horror, and flashing hatred came from her eyes, and beneath the loathing and the hatred there was also a sort of gloomy nod of the head, as though she were agreeing with herself, as if to say, I could tell right away, even before you opened your mouth, I should have noticed. I should have been on my guard. You could sniff it from a long way away, like a bad smell.
Yeah, he's an amazing. I mean, his writing is so beautiful.
So what does that? Does it give you visual cues when you're reading something like that? Does the scene present itself in your mind?
Yeah, that scene actually, the scene with Aisha, the young girl, when he's showing off for her, was definitely the most cinematic scene to me in the book. It felt like almost written in screenplay format, in fact, and yeah, it did. I mean, I don't think I referenced the exact passage in the book, but it obviously stuck in my mind because we have the shot of like just her eyes at the end of that scene. So clearly that made its impact. But yeah, that whole sequence is so moving to me. He also talks about how in the book how he feels like he has to approach her like a representative of his people, right. And that he's like an ambassador, and he's like, talking in peace terms, and she's like, just let's talk like kids, like, you don't have to tell us we don't have to make a peace plan here.
You just moved back to Los Angeles, and it's a city that doesn't have a very good track record about hiring women to direct movies. And you said something I thought was very interesting about film directing. You said, I feel that they should have all girls do it in school. It's good training for your voice and for the development of your own voice. Setting aside the idea that girls should learn how to direct, what does that mean about your own voice and how you found your voice as an artist through making this film?
Yeah, it was really a surprise to me when I started making the film. As a director, you're asked your opinion 1,000 times a day. And at the beginning, I had a really hard time expressing it. I would always like give an apology or something before I said what I wanted. I would be like, I'm not sure, this might be wrong. Tell me if you think it's not right. This could be ridiculous, but I think maybe it should be this way. And then you have these people looking at you like, I need to help you. So what do you want? And of course, after like 2 weeks, you realize, okay, it's going to be simpler for everyone if I just say like, I want this, I want that, I want that. And you realize, I realized I knew exactly what I wanted. I just had discomfort expressing it in a way where I'm the boss, you're helping me, and I'm going to be specific and clear about what I want. And that's what people working with you and for you want, if it's expressed in a kind and respectful way, of course. But I felt that my discomfort was definitely related to sort of female socialization, for me at least, and I'm sure there's people who were brought up differently. But for me, I felt like, oh, wow, I wish I had to do this in school.
You just came back from France, which has a much better track record of having women direct films, and that's not an issue for the country or the people who make movies there. Is there something culturally significant in France that might be missing here so that equation isn't equivalent?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting, and obviously I don't know that there's an answer. I have my own theory about it, but I mean it's not less sexist there. But women are definitely making more films. And so there's something Jill Soloway, the creator of Transparent, who I really, really admire. She gave a speech last year, and she talked about female desire and about how directing is all about desire. You have to say what you want all day long. I want this, I want that, and it's an expression of desire. And that Americans are very uncomfortable with female desire for food, for sex, for anything. And French, while they're not rah-rah feminists at all, are very comfortable culturally with female desire, and it's actually held up, I think, as something great if a woman is sexually desiring food, desiring good wine. That's an asset for a woman. So I think that is stealing from Jill Soloway's concept is a plausible understanding of why the entire young generation of great filmmakers in France is female, and here we're struggling to I mean, there are some really great people, but the numbers are really, really off.
I want to come back to the film for my last question, and that is, this is obviously a period film about an essential period in the development of the State of Israel. What do you think its modern relevance is to any audiences here or abroad?
Well, it's very much a refugee story and an immigrant story, and of course that is a big thing going on in the world today. We have obviously a huge refugee crisis going on with Syria, although there are other regions as well, but of course that's the really prominent one. And you see that it's not like a momentary thing. It really has long-term repercussions. This is a group of refugees coming from Eastern Europe, settling, and we're still dealing with the fallout from the decisions that were made around that time, almost a century later. And with immigration, obviously we've been talking a lot about in this country, but like no one immigrates. I mean, very few people immigrate just because they feel like it. Like you usually go because it's not good where you're coming from, or you have to leave often, or it's obviously much better where you're going to, or supposed to be much better. But it also takes a huge psychological toll on people who immigrate, and hopefully to have some empathy for that. That you're always, a piece of you is always somewhere else when you're an immigrant, and hopefully, to have more empathy for that.
Thank you guys so much for coming to the film and sticking around.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And Natalie, thank you for your time. Thank you.
So much.
You have been watching the Landmark Theater's Q&A podcast. For further in-depth discussions with filmmakers, be sure to check out the other Q&As available on our channel from past films. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date with all our bonus content. Thanks for watching.